Hello, and thank you for joining us for the fourth episode in our Board Performance Case Study series. Hi, I'm Dr. Yvonne Kafik, and in this episode of the Board Checkup, Mr. Maurice O'Connor, Chair of the Board of MS Ireland, and Ms. Jacinta Kelly, Vice Chair, join me to discuss the practice of self-assessing board performance using the checkup. The episode begins with important background information on the mission of MS Ireland, characteristics of the organization and board, and changes in the regulatory environment affecting charities in the Republic of Ireland, including a new charities regulator, governance code, and accountability requirements to comply with new governance standards. They share their experience with the process of self-assessing board performance and change in the board from it. Jacinta raises an important research question during the interview about the impact of rules and regulations on board effectiveness. Specifically, does it make boards more effective? Following the interview, I answer this question drawing from the research from the boards who have assessed performance using the tool, along with lessons learned that make the case of MS Ireland another great board love story. Thanks for joining us. Wonderful. Well, listen, I want to welcome you here this morning, MS Ireland, and we have Jacinta Kelly and we have Maurice O'Connor, and the chair and vice chair of MS Ireland. And the purpose today really is to speak to you, to boards who have used the checkup, about the efficacy and impact of the tool on the governance and leadership of your organization. We are using these interviews to produce a series of case studies that may be helpful to other boards that are considering this practice of online assessment of board performance. So welcome Jacinta and welcome Maurice. We'll just start with some introductions.
Shall I take it on first?
Go ahead,
very
Maurice,
much.
yeah.
Thank you very much, Yvonne. Lovely to be with you here today. My name is Maurice O'Connor. I live in Kilkenny at the moment in Ireland. I'm from Dublin, and I've been involved as a volunteer with MS Ireland since about 2013. I was elected to the board in 2015, and last September, i.e. 2020, I was elected chairperson. My original motivation for getting involved with MS Ireland at all was that one of my brothers had MS, and when I left employment and became kind of free and easy with my time, I thought I should give some of my time and expertise back to something, and in the voluntary sector, and MS Ireland was an obvious and a very good fit for me.
Okay, thanks, Maurice. So thank you, Yvonne. I'm Jacinta Kelly, and I'm involved with MS Ireland since 2017. That's when I joined the board, and then last September, Maurice talked me into being vice chair. That's my excuse, and I'm sticking to it. I'm based in Dublin for my sins, and I'm also in my own life a strategic marketing consultant. So my bias tends to be kind of around the strategy and where the organization is going strategically. So that's a particular interest to me in my work with MS Ireland. And again, while I didn't have anybody directly impacted with MS, again, I suppose, like everybody, you want to kind of give back and try to put your skills to the higher good. So my journey with MS Ireland has been, I have to say, a great one. I think in this market, we're heavily regulated as charities, and there's a lot of pressure on them. And it's actually quite comforting when you come onto a board and you can actually see all of the way the different strands of the organization work, which the board assessment is quite key to that, to keeping us on check. So my experience has been nothing but good, and I have, I suppose, 2 years to run within my board role. So looking forward to how we can move forward with this.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for being here. Now let's hear about MS Ireland and sort of key kind of characteristics of your organization and board.
Well, I suppose if you want to go back to the history of the organization, it was founded originally in a very kind of loose, unincorporated way in 1961. And it took till 1998 actually before we became incorporated as a company. But in that time, what was happening was that a lot of local support groups were forming in different places all around Ireland for people with MS and their families and carers to provide mutual support to one another. So that was growing and growing all around the country at the same time as I suppose a national organization was evolving. So from 1998, we were kind of a full national company structured organization, retaining local branches. And since then, I suppose the main things that have happened to us, that we might see and highlight is probably around the whole governance and the regulatory environment, which I'll come back to. But at the moment, we have, as far as we know, approximately 9,000 people in Ireland, in the Republic of Ireland with MS. We suspect actually there may be quite considerably more because of both the quality of research data that's around that. We don't actually have a national registry of MS in Ireland. That's not an unusual situation in the health sector here in Ireland. So we can't be definitive about the number of people that we serve and support, but we do provide services to anybody with MS who approaches us. We do have a membership of MS Ireland, but it's not necessary to be a member to receive any of our services at all. And we're very keen and constant about reinforcing that message. Within Ireland in general, we obviously operate here under a whole heap of different laws and regulations, I suppose, kind of from the top down or bottom up, depending on which way you look at it. We have a Companies Act from 2014 and its amendments, which dictate how we operate in general terms as a company. We've also then, in 2019, we also saw the first legal definition around the roles and responsibilities of charities. We had a Charities Act in 2009, and it has also been amended since then. And that one of the major things it did was to lead to the setting up of a Charities Regulatory Authority. We also now have a kind of an increasing, or the start of an increasing trend, I think, of professionalisation of the charity sector in Ireland. We have a Charities Institute Ireland. Under the Charities Regulatory Authority, we also have a Charities Governance Code, which we are kind of obliged by the Charities Regulatory Authority to report on every year. Apart from that, we also got the whole plethora and suite of typical things you would expect to find in any corporate environment: employment laws and regulations, pensions, health and safety, and a whole heap of other, I suppose, relevant different legislative and regulatory frameworks from around it. One other thing which we do, one of the things we do is to operate a respite centre in Dublin, to which people with MS can come for maybe a couple of weeks at a time, and giving their carers and families a bit of respite. And because of the nature of that centre, it's regulated by an organisation called the Health and Information and Quality Authority, who are an independent authority, and their role is to drive quality and safe care for people that use any health and social care services in Ireland. So we're regulated by them as well. That particular aspect of our operation is regulated by them and very regularly inspected by them as well. So we're subject in different ways to a whole plethora of different rules and regulations, and we operate and provide our services, which consist of kind of community work service, rehabilitation in terms of health promotion and rehabilitation, particularly in the areas of physiotherapy and yoga and exercise. We provide the respite service, we provide information, advocacy, and some small, I suppose, involvement in research, because we're a small organization. We don't have the budget to maybe get involved in fundamental research around MS like we might wish to, but hopefully we can do that in the future at some point. But in the meantime, we are actively involved in what we call practice-oriented research, which is research around health promotion and health protection and enhancement and rehabilitation. So that's kind of I suppose, a potted background insight into what MS Ireland is and what we do.
How big is your budget just to kind of get a sense of the size. You have so many programs and services. And
yeah, well, in our financial statements for 2020, we're reporting a total income of €5,723,484.
okay.
So just shy of €6 million. Now 2020 was an unusual year for us, obviously, as it would be for everybody else because of COVID. So yeah. I think that income is probably down on what it would have been for 2019, but it's the similar order of magnitude.
So talk a little bit about your board and the governance and some kind of key characteristics of your board of directors.
Well, we have, I suppose, for the purposes of putting in place our board and under the company's legislation here in Ireland, we have a constitution, and our constitution sets out the size and nature and modus operandi of our board. We have, and we recently, well, that was most recently revised in 2016 because we were obliged to do that for legal reasons. But our board is currently consists of a maximum of 14 people, which might on the face of it seem like quite a large board, but there are other charitable organizations who have larger boards, others who have smaller ones. Ours is 14. One component part of our board, our 3 members of our board are elected by what we call our council, and our council is a grouping of chairpersons of the individual branches of MS Ireland around the country, and they have the right, according to our constitution, to nominate 3 members of our board. And we've protected that right throughout any changes we've made to our constitution. We think it's very valid that our local membership would have their views represented around the board table. We also have, and it's right and proper that we do, probably not surprising, that we have people with MS on our board. At the moment, 4 of our board members have MS. So of our 14, we have 4 who have MS and 3 who are nominated by council. Our board term is a 3-year term, and according to our constitution, board members like myself and Jacinta can serve a maximum of 3 terms, after which we must step aside. So, and following on from that, we replace a third of our board members every year, a rollover. Now, existing board members like myself have been entitled to stand for re-election, and I've done that already, and a few years ago, and I'll be due to do that again this September. And I'm planning to avail of that right to stand for re-election. So we meet typically about 6 times a year. We have subcommittees, about 6 or 7 subcommittees. Some of them are the kind of ones you'd expect to have in any corporate environment, like finance, audit, risk, nominations and remuneration subcommittees, governance subcommittee. And then we have ones that I suppose align particularly to what we're doing and what our strategic priorities are. Part of our process is every year, after we kind of have a rollover, I suppose, of our board, would be to relook at both the type and composition and membership of our board committees. And we bring in volunteers from outside of the board as well to join those committees. We also have staff that attend them, as you might imagine, and the committees tend to meet, I suppose, as and when the kind of organisation priorities dictate that they should. We don't have a fixed meeting schedule really for committees, whereas we do set out in advance typically a fixed meeting schedule for our board, which is usually starting a calendar year. It would usually be February, April, May, June, September, and then maybe November, December. So we'd have 6 in a year. The board are all voluntary. We're all volunteers on the board. There's nobody paid on the board at all. We don't have any directors' fees. We do pay necessary directors' expenses if any of our board members want to claim those. The structure then of the rest of the organization, we have a CEO, a senior management team, who would cover the usual corporate kind of things, plus also our particularly management streams around our services, our fundraising, and then we've kind of finance and HR and the like going with that. As an organization, we're funded I think about 70% of our income at the moment, and certainly in 2020, came from state income and grants and other grant type sources. 30% of our income approximately in 2020 came from fundraising. Now that's again, those percentages are in a COVID year, so there were higher percentage of fundraising income in 2019, maybe in comparison to our total. So that's
are the rest from services, like fee for service, or is your completely are your programs free, or is there a fee associated?
No, we do charge for, predominantly gone online in the last year. We do charge, but it's a very small fee. So kind of service fees are not really a substantially significant part of our income stream. Really, it's around state supports. We have SLAs with what's called the Health Services Executive over here, which is a health delivery organization, government health delivery, service delivery organization. We have SLAs with them region by region around the country. They provide a large bulk of our income, and then we fund fundraising as well.
Okay, well, wow.
Yeah.
Talk about a very comprehensive and sounding like a very effective operation. Let me ask you the big question. Why, going back to 2016, what were you, kind of what motivated you to want to critically assess your performance using our tool? What were kind of the motivations going on at the time?
Well, I'm embarrassing myself now, Yvonne, by saying that to be quite honest with you, I can't remember. No, it was the first assessment you did in 2016 was 1 year after I joined the board. It does take that little bit of time, and Jacinta wasn't on the board at the time, but to be absolutely honest with you, I can't really remember why. It was, I know Jacinta will remember the name, Paddy Strong, who's the second previous chairperson to me, who I presume launched it, either at the suggestion of the CEO or at his own suggestion. So really, I can't remember where the suggestion arose, but we've certainly been part of the process since 2016.
Well, you mentioned in 2016 the Constitution was revised, and is this the time when the new code came in? And you mentioned here that every year you have to report on whether the extent to which you're governing up to code. Is that correct? And maybe talk a little bit about that.
Well, the history of the governance code, and feel free to come in and correct me if I'm getting any of this wrong, Jacinta. I think the history of the governance code actually the current governance code is defined and monitored by the Charities Regulatory Authority. Now, there was, prior to that, a kind of a voluntary governance code, which was had a very similar shape. The current one, I'd say, is probably in existence 2 to 3 years at most. But prior to that, as I said, the voluntary code was in place and had arisen, I think, out of a collective of organisations in the voluntary sector, who kind of collectively realised that having such a code would be of help to the general governance and management and effectiveness and the trustworthiness and transparency and everything of the voluntary sector. But it had no, I suppose, teeth behind it or kind of mandatory basis or anything like that. However, it was taken over, I think, as a useful suggestion by the Charities Regulatory Authority and launched then and made into a part of their reporting process for the voluntary sector. Probably 2 to 3 years ago, I suspect. Yeah, it's still, I think, was it this year? I think Jacinta was the first year there was mandatory to fully report on it. I think there was an element of lead into that in the last year or two, where you could kind of voluntarily choose to report against it and just use it as a way of kind of making sure that your board was in a position to fully report by about this year.
Yeah, well, I suppose, kind of generally with the environment in the last few years, the whole kind of regulation and government has been so much amplified by many of the scandals, unfortunately, with charities. So,
Indeed.
the few tend to impact all of us, and it's unfortunate because, it often seems, even as a board member, that a disproportionate amount of your time is kind of focused on kind of governance and check boxes and and you try not to lose sight of that the heart of it is people. We're really here. We all kind of signed up to be on the board because of people and giving them services, not to become black belts and governance, and all the regulation that goes with it. But unfortunately, it's just, when you're getting funding and you're reliant on funding, it's just a big part of making sure that everything is in place, the structures is in place, and that also that the general public have confidence in your structures to be, coming forward with their donations, with their volunteering and all of that. So and I suppose maybe that's even the interesting question to yourself, Yvonne, in terms of doing all of the assessments across the world. Do we have a disproportionate amount of regulation and a disproportionate amount of bias on kind of governance and those kind of structures versus other charities and other boards, because we're self-assessing, based on our environment. But
right.
you often wonder, how is the other charities working and how effective are they? And if all of that governance wasn't there, would they be even more effective in terms of focusing on what really matters?
Right. Well, those are excellent questions that we do hope to answer and do collect data around the world on this. So in hopefully not too long a time, we'll be able to get back to you on questions like that. But let's just shift into the process now of assessing, self-assessing, critically assessing board performance. And if you can tell us a little bit about the process, because every board that uses this tool creates their own process around how they carry it out. And so I'm wondering if you could just share with us what process you have put in place, and has that changed over time?
Okay, well, since we started it, I suppose the process, as you mentioned, Alice McKeown earlier on, the PA to our Chief Executive Officer, Alice has kind of coordinated the administration of the process every year since 2016. Typically, we've carried this out in early to mid Q4 of the calendar year, and we operate in calendar years. So she typically circulates the link to the questionnaire to all the board members, tell us what the deadline was, and keep reminding us, those of us who are a bit slower about responding to the questionnaire, to actually do so up until the time of the deadline. And then I presume the responses, well, they've accumulated with yourself, Yvonne, and you do your part of it. We get back the reports then, and those go back to Alice, and she circulates them. Now, in the last few years, what we've put in place a way of looking at the reports in which so certainly when I was deputy chairperson a few years ago, the chairperson at the time asked me, would I kind of just present back the feedback from yourselves, Yvonne, back to our own board. So I took the reports and looked at them and picked out the strengths and challenges and highlighted the scores, and prepared really just a presentation, a 15-20 minute presentation for our board, which I delivered at either the last board meeting of a calendar year or the first one of the following calendar year. So we've done that for the last few years. I did it twice or three times, and Jacinta has done that for me with the last one that we did in 2020. And we've typically tried to, there's a huge amount of detail. And what we try to do is to lift out of all of that detail, just particularly not so much the snapshot view, but as we've moved on over time, where things have changed, and particularly maybe where things have changed positively and negatively in relation to in comparison to the previous year.
Right.
So, and we've used that then in ways to, I think, to try and improve our own effectiveness, and just to get a general sense of where we're at, and what we can, what we're collectively saying that are our strengths and our more challenging areas. We'd also be on the lookout, I suppose, for some, if there are, or if there have been any outlying views expressed. There is, just reflecting on it now in the last, I don't know whether this has occurred to you, Jacinta, or not, but reflecting on it in the last few days, knowing that we were going to have this conversation, I did think that perhaps if it was possible, if we were doing this again, it might be better to actually change the timing of it slightly, because as our company AGM is on the third weekend in September. So like come the first week in October, we have a number of new board members, and we then circulate this survey. So of course, that means we could have 2, 3, 4 board members who really have only had their feet under the table for a short number of weeks. So actually carrying out, doing the survey maybe towards the tail end of a summer, where board members have been in place for at least a year, in terms of how to go about doing it, and how we would go about maybe sharing the results with board members. They all have access to the full detail of the thing anyway, but in terms of discussing it around the board table, as I say, we've taken the practice that the deputy chairperson at the time will take the detailed reports, look at it, and extract any key messages that she, in Jacinta's case, or me in previous years, would feel are most relevant to us. So that's what we've done.
So you've done this 4 times. So starting in 2016, 17, 18, and most recently in February 2020, which was a very significant month for everybody, I guess, around the world.
Yeah. And we did do it in 2019 as well, I think.
Okay.
I don't know, we're missing a year. I think we certainly did 4 retakes. So 17,
okay.
18, 19, and 20. Yeah.
Okay, you did it 5 times. So let's talk about, did any change result? And if yes, what kind of changes did you make? And how did the board engage in those decisions?
Well, I think just again thinking about that question the last few days, and you can follow on just into if there's anything that particularly springs to mind for you. But there would be 3 things that I would point to as examples. Maybe one of the things where we had, going back a few years, had noted a challenge was around our board meeting agendas being too full of operational details. Okay. And not having enough time for strategic considerations. Now, the last in the time of the previous chairperson and myself as deputy chairperson, and Jacinta having joined the board at that time as well, we did put some effort into restructuring our agendas, and not only the agendas and their timings, and but also the kind of supporting documentation that would be presented to the board by the CEO. We introduced permanent, on every agenda, a time slot for discussing items of strategic importance, to make sure that we wouldn't lose sight of that. We also then introduced, at the suggestion of one of our other board members, who's a senior HR manager in a large corporate over here, introduced a few minutes at the start of every agenda just to reflect on some case studies that were given descriptions of by our CEO. And we look at usually about 2 case studies of basically the lives of people with MS, every single board agenda. So we would be just getting and leaving it really mostly to the CEO to source those for us. I think there was one recently where we have a team of bloggers who write stuff for us on social media platforms, and we thought we'd take kind of an insight from one of those at one of our more recent board meetings. But in general, the CEO will tell us, and she'll solicit those from our community workers. So we get stories of people with them, their real lives and the lived experience, and warts and all really of people with MS. to start our board meetings with. So that really focuses us back on what Jacinta's point was about, not getting sucked into just spending all our time with the corporate governance side of things and the finance.
Okay.
And so that came in the last few years. Another one was the role and responsibility of board members in relation to fundraising. That was mentioned as one of the more challenging areas or subtopics for us a few years ago as well. This, I suppose, I don't know. Do I need to explain maybe the difference, the attitude to the voluntary sector and boards and fundraising? And it's quite a different culture over here in Ireland than it may be over in the United States or Canada. There is certainly people don't get invited onto the boards while at the same time being asked to write a check or expected to make large donations or anything like that. That's not typically part of the culture here in Ireland, and it's certainly not within MS Ireland. But at the same time, on the flip side of that was that there was quite a lack of clarity around, and it just wasn't clear what expectation the organization had of our board members in relation to fundraising, and therefore it has led to a bit of confusion, I suppose. So we did, the previous chairperson did draft up a paper setting out what expectations there might be, and that was discussed and agreed by the board. And really, I suppose the best way of it's also, by the way, circulated to prior to anybody joining the board to all nominees for board membership, so they would know upfront where we stand as a board on this. It really sets out, I suppose, a menu of possible levels of involvement. We'd be quite happy for board members if they wish to make donations directly themselves, or some board members might do that from time to time. Others might just wish to sit in the background and maybe support our fundraising activities and promote them through their own social media channels or through their professional connections wherever they may be working. Or some of them may agree to actually take part in fundraising challenges. Is something small and easy, from the kind of thing that's come along in recent years, like Facebook personal Facebook fundraisers, to being part of maybe large fundraising corporate type style events, whatever. So there's basically this document which we agreed around the board table it kind of sets out the possibilities for participation and or support of our fundraising activities. So it clarifies the thing. I don't think it's not pushing any board member in any particular direction in relation to support or involvement in fundraising. But I don't think it particularly changes our culture either. But I think it has clarified the position. And it's probably, like a lot of things, it's probably a bit of a compromise, but it did achieve a certain effect. Another one more recently, which Jacinta was very centrally involved in, was putting in place our current 2020 to 2024 strategic plan. Okay. Now, we did have a previous strategic plan, but I think the big improvement with this one is that we have not just put it in place, but and identified its key objectives and initiatives, but we've also made sure and tried progressively to work on ensuring that
a more critical view of yourselves than if you just invite your board to take it. So you may want to diversify that because you are very representative, it seems, in engaging your communities in the governance of your organization. So that's one thing you can do it right away. And another one is we're coming out with a governance issue assessment. So you could involve, so if a big issue comes up that affects all of you and your communities, you can invite those members of your communities to assess how well you governed that issue. And that's a new assessment that we're coming out with. Whereas this one on board performance is really an internal assessment to really beef up the governance, both behavior and practice. And so that one may be more appropriate for an external 360 review, because you're going to know, well, this is the process we put in place, and here's how we made our decisions. And we have an assessment that will break that down into different dimensions of effectiveness. From the political dimension, which I hear a lot in this conversation, to the rational goal. So what's the whole purpose of advancing the mission? To the empirical, was it an informed decision, and how was the issue governed? What information did you use? And then how consensual it was, who participated. So those are the dimensions of this. And I think, as I said, we're going to be coming out with that, and you will be one of the first people we'll probably ask to test before we roll it out. So I think that might be helpful. And then, then you can just see the checkup as being this kind of, you can diversify who gets involved with that. You can do the changes you already talked about, moving it to before your AGM, right? So board members had a whole year to get their feet wet in this, and they've got a better perspective. So that probably does explain kind of the up and down of your results. But yeah, you are highly effective board. And, so when you're at that level, I don't know how you use the strength and challenges, but the challenges still are your challenges, no matter, how problematic they are, right?
Yeah. I think you're right. And that, like, even the which we have focused on previous years in the kind of our top 10 strengths and our top 10 opportunities / challenges. As you can well imagine, we can't hope to take any effective action on all 10 in any particular year. So we really kind of have been, as our past practice, and the 3 examples I gave you, it would suggest that what we've really tried to do is kind of, pick what might be the most important at a particular time, and address that as a board. And there are still those from the last one, just looking at the top 10 opportunities from the 2020 one, and number 1 is finding high quality new board members. Yes, it's a constant challenge. I think we've probably managed to find, certainly the last few years, find some excellent new board members, and very fortunate. But I suppose it's always an unknown prospect. We don't have a large pipeline, I suppose, of potential board candidates that we can keep picking from, but and to some extent it would be a bit reactive as well, in terms of if we lose a board member during a particular year for whatever reasons, we would generally look at the kind of key skills that we do need from new board members. And in fact, there are some board candidates coming on that, for assuming their elections ratified by the membership in the AGM in September, that will be excellent and will address some skill deficits that we definitely have on the board at the moment, and it will kind of align very well with some of the key strategic things that we want to achieve. So well, we've been fortunate, but it's an ongoing thing. It'll probably be always number 1.
It is now that in fundraising across boards across countries. But you are right that we see issues, so boards picking off, they're kind of priority issues, and we see over time those moving up and down. So new ones, the old ones go away, and new ones bubble up. And so the checkup seems to help on which, where we've been on that and where we need to go on some new ones. So, and I'm seeing in your data that you're making more changes now than you had in the past. And so it makes me wonder whether, that change, there's a theory of change around here, that it's a process. And at the governance level, it's just like anything else. It takes time. And it's, is it a matter to you of continual improvement? And then, then that does that kind of seem like, management in some ways at the governance level, right? And many board members didn't sign up to do that. They do it all day. So I'm not thinking about what your perspective is on managing board performance. And then another question would be, what are kind of some of the lessons learned through this? And then finally, what advice would you have for other boards considering it?
Well, certainly if I could start, with the first one, like any other boards who haven't, and actually I did have an approach from my sisters involved in some voluntary boards, and I suggested this tool to her, and the advice I'd have is to just do it, absolutely do it, because, you know, for any board, if we're not stopping to take the time to consider ourselves and our effectiveness as a group, as a board, we're completely missing an opportunity for our organization to be more successful. So I think it's essential really to do it. That's what I'd say to anybody else asking me, is this something we should do or not? Absolutely, yes, it is. Just go and do it. And when you have to make a multi-annual commitment to it, because it's really trends rather than picture snapshots in time, I think, that are as important as one another. Sorry, what were the other things you asked me, Yvonne?
Oh, you know, just about the process, you know, of assessing and change and making change, and, you know, what kind of expectations should new boards set around this?
New boards, well, I think for us, I would like to see that we would be able to put our hands on our hearts and say that we are constantly working to be a better collective as a board. Because if we took the foot off the pedal in that regard, I think the natural consequence would be that we'd start to slip backwards. And that would be something that I certainly wouldn't like to see happen with our board. I think it'd be a very negative thing. So I think it is good to try and keep working on where are there areas that we can improve on, and whatever different dimensions. And I suppose there's so many dimensions, as your study alludes to, in the operation of a board, that it's good to have a structured way of highlighting which are the most the most impactful or potentially impactful areas of strength and challenge to identify and work on. So I think it's good. We've done this, as you say, like we've had the initial one and 4 retakes of 5 years, and now I don't mind saying to Yvonne, will be one of the times coming into this, or before we even made contact in relation to this conversation, I've been starting to think about, okay, what way do we take this continuous board self-assessment forward? Is there still potential in doing the self-assessment the exact same way and looking at its outputs the same way? Is there something different we can do? The fact that we're constantly putting ourselves in the green zone, are we being too kind to ourselves? Do we need something of a more gentle but severe challenge in a way? Right. To see, are we really as kind of high performing or as effective as we think we are? Or how do we is there another way to measure that, or to tie our sense of effectiveness to the outcomes that our organization achieves? There's those sort of considerations that I've been kind of thinking about and sharing with Jacinta in the last, since the last assessment that we did, and since the discussion we had on it at the board. So, but I would be the last person to suggest that we need to stop doing this, because we don't. We need to keep doing something of a self-assessment in some way.
I like the idea of broadening it out, though. I think that we try to get that 360 feel for it, and I suppose I maybe to have somebody that's independent come in, and because as Maurice was saying, we tend to do the presentation ourselves and we kind of share the results and we just have a conversation, but maybe we should look to try and push more of a structured, I don't know, away day or away morning even, just to kind of have somebody to come in and have some breakouts to discuss it, and to get down and dirty as to, okay, if we're going to take some priorities as to what we want to focus on for the following year to improve or change. Even if we are in the green zone, what would they be? So,
Right.
just to use it more, rather than becoming, because I have a feeling that it's starting to fall into a checkbox exercise in terms of our governments, that we do the review.
Right.
Yeah,
And we see that between the boards that change and the boards that don't.
yeah.
And there are impacts that you don't have access to that we are going to make available to you, so you actually can see what is the board's impact on the organization and where is the board having the most impact. In your case, you're having the most impact on the challenges on governance, which is exactly what I would expect to see. Challenges facing the organization, the CEO, and the board. So on governance itself, that's your highest area of impact. And so these are the kinds of things that we're collecting that we're going to inject back to you that could help you get a better sense of how your board, what impact your board is having in multiple areas. And if you look at that report, you're going to see that maybe you're having more impact internally than externally, and maybe that then kind of feeds your own board development work plan, and maybe that is set every year. I know I'm on 4 boards and we all do this, and I'm chair of the governance committee on one, and we set those top priorities and we build them into the work plan, but we also do focus on them at the whole of board and in a retreat around and we bring in experts on different topics. Let's say on board diversity, what is it and how do we diversify both socially and in terms of our composition, our race and ethnicity and other kind of characteristics. And so we bring in an expert to talk about that, to inform that conversation. So in a way, the checkup just surfaces there's an issue, but it's really up to the board to decide what are the best strategies around addressing that, and what information do we need before we can actually even surface some of those ideas. So those are other ways that you can use that. And again, I think now, because we were a research study and we didn't respond, we have all of this data and we'll inject back into tips. So we have a newsletter, please, review that. That would have a number of tips about from how to handle outliers to how to surface and plan, use the data that emerges into developing your own work plan, and some other things. But yes, excellent conversation. It sounds to me like you are fully engaged on the governance side, and those are really great questions to be having about using it, because it isn't just a checkbox.
No.
It's a diagnostic that just surfaces things that you may not be aware of, or and the way it's framed as issues that exist or don't in the perspective, the more people that participate, the more likely you're going to surface the very challenges that you want to talk about. So, so you can involve other people. So maybe think about that for the next one, and make some of the changes you sounded like. It's often just little tweaks, right, as you get more experience with it. And but yeah, bringing in development experts, but still owning this yourselves. And what we're seeing is that leadership is developing at the governance level. There are multiple leaders and sources and levers of leadership now that are available to the organization, which I think makes succession planning much easier. Bringing people in and then, like you say, there's a limited number. So you really want to maximize the leadership on your board, right? So, so any other advice you'd give to boards considering using the checkup? or about governance assessment in general?
Personally, no. As I said, if anybody hadn't used it before, I'd say absolutely do use it. It's great. It'll work for you, and it needs a few years of doing it consistently to see. Maybe kind of think about the timing. When is the most effective time of the year to do it. There is another aspect of things you might have an insight into yourself, Yvonne, around there's a certain kind of organic kind of dynamic around a board where you've got, particularly with ours, and it's related to our constitution, our setup, I mentioned like three-year terms. So you'll have people like me who'd be going into their 7th year of being on the board. Out of 9, we'll have a few new board members coming on in September, and a mix of everything in between. So you've got those who are absolutely brand new to the board, and typically, I think, the culture would be, certainly I would suspect that some people would kind of sit back and see how things are for a while before they really kind of come to the fore, and then as people get into kind of the length of time of 7, 8, 9 years on a board, there's an assumption of kind of nearly knowing it all, or not quite necessarily tiredness, but maybe losing a little bit of energy for it, or kind of really willingness to kind of engage in challenge as much as they might have done in the middle period. So there's that. I think there's that optimum time after, certainly well after having the first year on the board and before spending too long on the board, that maybe is the absolute right time for people to really understand the nature of the organization in sufficient depth to be able to challenge and provide and be at their most effective as a board member.
Right.
Then underlying that is the whole challenge, which again is going back to the nature of voluntary boards. The time that Jacinta mentioned is the time, and the ability to participate is one thing. We have to try and find our board members and find people that are able to participate and have the right kind of skills, and that's something we try to do. But the ability to put in the kind of time that it sometimes needs can be quite challenging. I mean, I'm very fortunate in that I don't work for a living anymore, so I've got plenty of time on my hands, and I do things because I have the time to do it, and I want to. Jacinta works. Most of the rest of our board are working, so their time is limited,
right?
And that's a challenge, I think, for participation in boards and committees, and it's also a challenge for succession planning, because it won't be any secret to Jacinta that it does take, certainly as a chairperson, it does take quite a lot of time. And I realized that with the previous chairperson as well, because her professional work commitments were such that she was decreasingly able to put in the time that it needed as her period as chairperson moved on. So there are those challenges as well that that aren't often recognized, maybe in a more, when comparing with the more corporate type of board where everybody's there and they're paid directors and all the rest.
Right, for sure. Yeah. So the voluntary sector has its unique challenges in that regard.
Absolutely, yeah.
Jacinta?
I mean, I suppose for me, the advice I would give is, just kind of go into these things where I'm personally always looking to improve. So, although you're kind of doing this assessment as a group, you are looking for ways of, well, how can I step up my game, and what do I need to do? And you also have to be conscious of good assessment, and you just need to be kind of careful not to kind of dig in, so that if the word strategy, for example, comes up, my ears would prick up to say, oh, is there a gap that we have there? So you're just always trying to be looking at this from it's how to make us overall better performers, more effective. And not to lose sight that it is for the good of the organization. I know, yes, it's all around governance, but ultimately it's for the good of the organization. And that's what I get back from it, that, yes, I work, and yes, this is voluntary, but, you learn lots. You're working with people from a lot of different sectors. We have people on our board from banking, from legal, from all walks of life. And it's incredibly rewarding in that way. And it's also incredibly humbling when you see the output of, your work. Yes, we're in a board, we're locked away, but when you see what's happening at the front line, it's incredibly rewarding that way. Those kind of things don't necessarily come into the assessments, but you're just also trying to hold that in your mind's eye as well, as to what are we here for at the end of the day? What are we doing all of this? And that's ultimately what I get out of it too. So although it can be quite an investment in time, it's also incredibly rewarding. So I would first say to anybody, join a board if you can, and embrace everything that comes with it, the assessments, the governance, any learning opportunities, because it is kind of incredibly rewarding that way.
Well, on one positive note here, another positive note, we do see that the perceived value of director contributions increases with this process. So directors are getting more clear about their roles and the value of their contributions to the mission, just as you're saying. So we see that increasing over time. So this is other information we really do need to make available to you all. So thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day, Jacinta, and as well, Morris, and sharing MS Ireland with us and your experiences. And we're so grateful to participate with you in this journey, even though we're kind of in the background. We are keeping tabs. And we look forward to sharing your story with you, and you can share it with your communities and then with other boards that really are seriously considering improvement through a practice like performance assessment.
What can be learned from the experience of MS Ireland with the practice of board performance assessment? Like the experience of other boards, there are important lessons to be learned from this case. With regard to the question Jacinta raised about whether more regulation translates into more effective governance, our research shows that when compliance is the primary motivation for board performance assessment, boards are less likely to change governance behavior and practice following it. This doesn't mean that regulation has no effect. It is a significant factor in boards choosing to adopt the practice, which is associated with board effectiveness over time. This leads me to lessons I took away from the experience of MS Ireland with regard to getting the most value out of the practice of performance assessment. Lesson 1. Go beyond compliance with governance standards. Consider setting a goal for the assessment and priorities for board change based on the results generated from it. To quote Jacinta, don't let it become a checklist to demonstrate standards, but an opportunity for board reflection and development. Lesson 2. The second lesson is to go beyond the board in assessments of performance, to include management and staff who interact with the board and others who have an important perspective to share on the board's performance. Lesson 3. Allow enough time to review results, to take a deeper dive on the most salient issues that emerge, whether that is allowing more time in a regular meeting of the board, organizing a special meeting, or a retreat. Anything that allows the board to think strategically about its own performance, set priorities for change, and assign responsibility to individuals and groups who are responsible for them. Lesson 4. Involve others who have expertise to share or bear in the implementation of board change and development work. This can include consultants, board members, staff, anyone who can help the board make meaningful change. So what about those elements that make the case of MS Ireland another great board love story? Passion. The mission was the passion of this organization. It was the heart of MS Ireland. And this was evident in the change the board made to include case studies to connect board members to the mission at the start of every board meeting. Protagonists. The board chair and the vice chair worked tirelessly and collaboratively. They did not adopt the practice blindly. They asked important questions and they played to their strengths and interests and were an effective team. Timing. They considered the needs of board members in the timing of board performance assessment, specifically the need to move it later in the year to allow more time for director orientation and engagement in the governance process. This action reflected the value of being attentive and responsive to director needs. Suffering. I think you could really feel the weight and the pain of the changes in the regulatory environment in Ireland on the board and organization in the interview. Match. MS Ireland did a really good job of navigating all those regulatory changes and meeting them strategically, aligning plans with performance and filling gaps in knowledge and services to meet the needs of individuals and families affected by MS in the Republic of Ireland. Thank you for joining us. And if you would like today's podcast, we would appreciate if you would subscribe, share it with other boards in your network, and leave a review, especially if you liked it. Feel free to leave comments and questions about the board in this podcast or boards of directors in general that you would like us to explore in future episodes. And if you have any suggestions for me, please feel free to reach out using the contact information. Thanks for joining us.